Morning, guys. Thanks for joining. Vijay from Grey Atom. Uh, Thanks, Abhishek. Thanks, Rohit, for
Good
joining.
morning, Vijay.
Hey, good morning. So I think we'll be good to start in the next 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Once the mentor joins and other folks join as well. Okay.
Vijay,
Yeah.
just a quick question.
Yeah.
Today's session is mainly related to how to use GitHub, right? Or something else?
So basically, yes, GitHub is the main thing. So the core of the session is how to leverage GitHub when it comes to using it for portfolio projects or forking something, contributing to GitHub repos. So mainly when it comes to contributing with regards to the data science domain, that's all the session is based upon. Okay.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
Hey Rohit, you're appearing twice in the list. Have you like joined via mobile and laptop both? We've got two
Yeah,
Rohit.
actually, I have issues with my laptop. That's why I use mobile also. I'm in Jammu and Kashmir.
Okay, okay, good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
good.
you.
Yeah, no problem. Morning, Sajjad. Thanks for joining. I'm just trying to unmute you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Vijay. Good morning.
Hey, great. Thanks for joining, Sajjad. Good morning. Guys, so we've got Sajjad who has joined. He'll be taking a session with you on GitHub for data science. Just to give a quick intro about Sajjad. He's a data scientist. He's currently working, leading the data science and data management team in India at Trafigura, which caters to advanced analytics requirements globally, including risk, trading, and operation. He's also been a mentor with Grey Atom since long, since he likes to share his expertise and train folks. And we are really privileged to have him here in this session. Thanks, Ajad. You can start now.
Okay, Vijay, thank you. So, good morning to everyone. I hope my voice is clear. If anyone faces any issue, please let me know. So, we'll begin the session in a minute. Just to create some background, while during the session, if you face any issue with respect to my voice, please raise it immediately. Another thing is, while we proceed for our session, if you got any questions, you can ask it within the chat, or even if you want to unmute yourself, you can unmute yourself and ask that question. Otherwise, if you don't have any questions, it's a request that please everyone keep yourself on mute. But then it's not. I don't mean that you should not. You are not able to. You're not allowed to ask questions in the middle. Although I will be reserving some time at the end of this session for answering your queries. Now we want the session to be interactive. So I would be discussing a lot about the topic, which I'm going to come in a little while. But what I want is during the session I would also do a little bit of hands-on also. So just to show you like how to work with the current topic. But I want all of you to, if possible, please replicate whatever I'm doing in my at my end in your own system also. For some people, since I'm not really sure about your background, so I believe all of you are from varied background. So some of you might be quite aware about the topic, while some of you might be beginners in this topic. So I'd like to keep it at a middle ground where everybody is able to catch up. So if you think that I'm going a little bit slow, please let me know. But then and same is the case in the vice versa scenario. If you think that I'm going too fast, please let me know. I'll change my pace accordingly. All right. Giving you a minute for everyone to just get ready. What we are going to discuss today is we are going to discuss today GitHub for data science. We'll be discussing about the different things within why we should use GitHub, what is GitHub, and then we will do a little bit of hands-on also. So just giving you a minute to get ready with everything, and if possible, if you have a laptop, working laptop, please get ready with at least a command terminal and git install if not installed already, and also like I believe everyone has an account on github.com. If you don't have, please create one account in github.com. All right. Okay. Someone says there is an echo in my sound. Is it same for everyone? Can someone else confirm that there is an echo? Okay. So Soumya says it's not.
It's fine, Sajjad. I guess if you can just increase the volume a bit, it would be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so some people are hearing a little bit of echo. I'm not really sure why is that, but let me do one thing. Okay, all right, I'm going to share my screen now. Right. So again, I welcome everyone. Now I'm starting with the topic. So today we are going to discuss GitHub for data science. So now just before we discuss about what GitHub is and what Git is, just a brief introduction about different version control system. So Git is a type of version control system, or we also call it a source control system. Now, what is a version control and what is a source control? I mean, sometimes you can call any of this. So basically, whenever you write your code, what happens is you need to also sometimes share it with different other people. And even if you don't share it with different other people, you still need to maintain it, and you still need to create a history of the different modifications and changes you do. This is true not only just with codes; it is also true with any documentation you provide, any source which you want to keep in your system. So let's say even if you have a file, even if you are not a programmer, let's say if you are working with a slide presentation. So you have created a presentation. What typically you do is you do certain. Let's say your boss has asked you to create a presentation for you, and then you create that slide and you name it as version 1. And then after some modification, you send it to your boss, and then your boss sends it back to you. Said that okay, in slide number 32, please do these changes. And then you go back and you do those changes, and then you create and you name it as version 1.1. And then you keep on doing. You keep again send it to your boss, and you keep on doing it. So let's say at a particular time you are at version 1.9, and then you send it to your boss, and again your boss says that okay, no, don't do this image which you have replaced in this slide is not good. Please revert back to the previous change. So maybe the earlier one which was better. Now what you had done is you had kept on saving the things, so you don't know what image was previously again. Either you again search for that image, and you again find that image, replace that image. Basically, if you remember all the historical changes you do, you can do it again. But if you don't remember, then you will have to start all over. So to avoid these activities, what typically you practice is, rather than saving the same file as different name, you start saving each file as a different file. So you also have version 1, you also have version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and so you end up at the end, you end up at with having, maybe when you are at version 1.9, you actually have 10 such files. All right. So that is one way of keeping a track of the different changes which you make. Although now you have solved the problem that even if you want to revert back to any previous history, you can do that by just reverting back to your change of version 1.5. But while you do it, it will become very cumbersome for you to observe those changes, because since you have followed through the different modifications from 1.1 to 1.5 to 1.9, you always have to open all of the files and then compare and see where the change, how 1.9 is different from 1.5. All right. So this keeping a track of change is typically a very cumbersome activity. Next thing is, this is with respect to a single user. Next thing, just assume another scenario where you have another user, maybe your boss himself has opened your file also. So rather than sharing the slide over email, you have kept it in some shared path and asked your boss also to check it. So your boss has also opened the PPT, and you have also opened the PPT. So sometimes when someone else has already opened the PPT, it will say that someone else is already using it, please open it in read only mode. So your boss has opened it, a copy of it, and then he again does certain changes in some slide, while in parallel you are also working on the same slide and you have done some other changes. So based on who has saved the file first, it will be a scenario where the latest update will be kept in the slide, while one of them will be lost. So this is again another difficult scenario which we don't want. What we want is, maybe my boss was working on a different slide and I was working on a different slide number basically, and then I want to keep both the changes. So if you want to do that activity, again it's difficult if you don't use any version control. So to monitor these activities, to help us with these activities, we typically, rather than just doing it as save as, we use some sort of version control system, or source control system. Now, source control system, there are many types of source control system available in the market. Git is one of them, in fact, one of the most popular one. Similarly, we have SVN. Similarly, we have TFS. All right. Now, we will always remember that these are not the only source control systems available. There are lots of other source control systems available in the market also. These are some of the popular ones. SVN is somewhat the more popular one. If I go back maybe 5 or 6 years back, or even maybe 10 years back, which is basically based on a client server repository model, where we have each individual user is a client and they submit it to a server. All right. Similarly, TFS also. TFS is basically a Microsoft product. It comes integrated with Visual Studio. So if you are working in a lot in the Windows environment where we have Microsoft, typically you are writing maybe some .NET code, C# code, F# code, and if you don't want to get out of that environment, you want to use some integrated services within the Visual Studio itself, you can use TFS, all right? Team Foundation Server. It is again also a client server model. Now TFS and SVN are good, but a lot of developers, if you talk to today, these days, they will say that they prefer Git, just for the reason being, one is it's a distributed repository model. So distributed repository model means it works in in the distributed system. So if you have a little bit idea of how big data or distributed systems works, Git also works in the same fashion. All right, so it stores data in a distributed fashion. So it's very easy to scale up horizontally. And second is like every individual users can work on a particular same project in parallel, and then even they can commit their changes. We will come to these parts. What do you mean by this committing changes and all this? They can commit their changes in parallel. If there is a conflict, they provide a very good tool where you can observe the conflicts. We can merge those conflicts depending on who is the administrator, how to resolve that. Then if you want, you can create multiple branches of the same project also. So branches are nothing. Branches are somewhat copies of the same. So like you have dev, UAT, production. So you can create these branches also. We'll see how to do those activities. So that is why Git has become very popular these days. And within Git also, like GitHub is one of the provider of Git. So Git is the source control system, but then there are different companies which has created a wrapper on top of Git, which you can use to utilize Git. So there is GitHub is one. Similarly, there is GitLab also. Similarly, there is Atlassian also. So GitHub is basically one provider who is the main maintainer of Git also. But then GitHub is not actually Git. So you can use Git without using GitHub. Now what GitHub is the cloud provider, where you can create your repository on GitHub. So to use Git, it is not necessary that we use GitHub also. All right. So I'll show you these things also, like how we can use Git without using GitHub. We can use Git without using GitHub and also create a remote repository also. So it is again not necessary that we can use Git only locally if we don't use GitHub. All right, so we'll show this. So you can create you can make your own machine as a cloud also, and your own machine. So sometimes this happens like in a multi-structure environments where you have multiple people working on the same projects, but you are maybe skeptic, your organization is skeptic on moving on to cloud, moving their source code to cloud. So there you can create some of the shared machine itself as a cloud, and that you can convert into a remote repository, and then everybody can commit their changes to that remote repository also. So we'll see that. All right, so this is one way of using Git by making your own local servers or any server on your network as a cloud, and then that becomes your remote repository. Other way is you use some cloud which is provided. So some cloud which is provided, when I say that, then GitHub comes into picture. So GitHub is one of the cloud provider where you can create your remote repository. All right. Now, just like GitHub, we have GitLab also. So similarly, just like you use GitHub, you can again GitLab also provides those services. Similarly, we have Atlassian also. Atlassian is in fact a very big company which provides multiple solutions in managing IT projects. So version control or source control is one of the things which they do. Similarly, they also provides a very good tool for documentation, which is popularly known as Confluence. And then they provide other systems like Scrum Masters and all those things, right? Okay, now moving on. As you understand now why we have what is GitHub. So first thing we should all keep in mind is GitHub is not Git. Git is different, GitHub is different. Git is the main tool which is required for source control. GitHub is a platform. GitHub is a cloud platform provide to use whenever you are using Git. So to store the data within Git, to store the data or your source code in a cloud environment, you can use GitHub. All right. Again, repeating, GitHub is not required to be necessary component when you are using Git. All right. Next thing is it provides a very good platform to perform access control. You can not only just add multiple users, you can control those users also. And when I say control those users means you can control their access levels. So maybe for a project you have 10 people, 20 people working on the same project, but you don't want to provide the same number, same access level to each of the user. So for some user you might want to give all complete access, maybe the administrator who is the main controller of that project, while some other user you might want to make them maintainer, while some other user you might want to make them as developer, and for some you can make them as tester, and for some you can provide some. So maybe for some users, some part of the project is accessible where they can read the project, but they cannot do any edit on this. For some users, they can make modifications, they can do the edits, but once they commit, they cannot merge those changes with the main branch or master branch. So maybe some users are allowed to do the changes, commit those changes, push it to the remote repository, but there is an administrator who is only allowed to do the merge changes. So if there is any conflict, only the administrator is allowed to perform this activity. So you can manage these access level very easily in GitHub. So that is why, again, one of the other things, which is a very necessary thing required in the IT environment, that we don't want to provide complete control of the overall project to each member of that particular project. All right. It has a very good pluggable merge strategies. Again, as just now I was saying that if you commit your changes, if there is a conflict, there is a very good scenario. So now don't get confused when I say these words like commit, aware about how source code control system works. In irrespective of which platform you use, you might be aware about these terminologies, commits and merge. All right. But if you are not, just hold on. In the next few slides, we are going to discuss this in a lot more details. So don't worry about it. All right. Okay. It has a toolkit based design also. So although I don't prefer it, and in fact, I'll show you both the way how you can use GitHub. So you can use Git using a tool also, GUI tool. So we have a GUI tool where you can use that tool to do almost all of the activities what you want in Git. So whether it's about cloning a project, or it is about maybe committing your changes, or it is about comparing two changes, doing a merge, doing a pull operation, or pushing your project back into the remote repository. So almost all of the activities which is possible in Git, you can use them using the Git GUI also. All right. So there is a tool called as GitHub for desktop. So you need to download it, log in, and once you are logged in, you are connected to your remote repository, and whatever you want to do, you can do it using the GUI bus just by click of certain buttons also. But I don't prefer it. I always like it to use command line for doing this activity. And in fact, I'll show you both the ways how you can do the different operations of Git using GUI, and how you can do the different operations of Git using command line also. It is always if you go by my recommendation, I would always prefer to use command line. The simple reason being, you get more flexibility when you're using command line. But also it doesn't tell me that there is any limitation on the GUI. But most of the companies would prefer a developer, a certain person from a developer background, to use command lines for these activities. So if you want to use GUI on a daily basis, do use it, but don't. But also know how to use the command line, specifically when you are working with the company, or specifically when you are dealing with certain changes on servers. So maybe it is good on your local system if you deploy this. But let's say if you are working on some dev servers, and within those dev servers, typically any GUI will not work. You will only have command line access. Similarly, if you're working on some EC2 instance on Amazon, or maybe Azure instances, there also you might, and if it's a Linux instance, you might not have GUI based access there. So there you are left with no option but use command line. So it's better to know how to use command line, and use that. And although the command line will seem a little bit cumbersome at the beginning, but maybe with a little bit of practice, and by practice I mean say where once you do this activity maybe 3 or 4 times, you will remember almost everything. And even if you don't remember, you can always look up to the command. All right. So we'll come to those aspects. All right. The garbage it has a very good garbage collection also. So like people coming in from Java background might be aware about what garbage collection is and how important garbage collection is. Maybe if you are from a pure data science background who have started with Python and do not have any knowledge of any other languages, you might not be might not find this relevant. But just remember that garbage collection is one of the important things whenever you develop any tool. Git provides a very good garbage collection scenario there also. Some of the cons you can say, or like limitations of using Git is one is definitely that it has a very large history logs. So sometimes it becomes difficult to read those history logs, although it can be, you can take it as an advantage also, you can take it as a limitation also. Like it maintains the complete log of everything what you have done since the beginning of that project. So till some point it looks good that you can revert back, but after a certain point it becomes irrelevant to look back what changes were done maybe 5 years back. So maybe you are only concerned about whatever storing the history logs till the last 6 months, but Git will store everything. So scrolling through that whole log sometimes becomes cumbersome. All right. So again, this could be a limitation, this could be an advantage. It is just a way of seeing things. All right. Okay. Now we have understood what GitHub is, some bullet points on why we use GitHub. So again, I've been saying the same things. Now, this is not from a technical point of view, it is more from your career point of view, why you should use GitHub. So now you understand that there are different source control systems, Git, SVN, TFS, and then there are others. Now you understand what GitHub is and what is the difference between Git and GitHub is. Assuming that you understand these, now we are talking about why to use this in your career and why you should do this. All right. So first bullet point, I've already mentioned that irrespective of how your profile looks, irrespective of your resume, whether it adds any value to your resume, if you are a developer, again, irrespective of whether you are a software developer, whether you are a .NET developer, whether you are a Python developer, or you are a data scientist, whatever you want to call yourself, if you are building something, with respect to something technical, even in fact I have said that even if you are not building something which is technical, even if you are creating just some Word document, Excel sheets and PowerPoint PPTs, still GitHub is going to make your life so much easier when it comes to managing your whole project. So if you are working with a single file, it's all well and good without Git. But when you start working with a project which has maybe 10, 20 files and you need to maintain a history, and then there are multiple users working on the same files, if you do not use a source control system, your life is going to be so messed up. All right. So for that reason, we should definitely use some source control system, whether it is Git or whether it is SVN, that doesn't matter. All right. Although a lot of users do prefer GitHub these days. All right. Now, question comes is like why to use GitHub when it comes to our profile or resume part of perspective. So from that perspective, again, GitHub provides a very good platform to share what you have done. All right. So when I say share what you have done, is what it means is you create your resume, you spend a lot of time in creating your resume, where you write different n number of things. You start with your educational qualifications, you write about your different technical skills which you have, you write about your academic qualifications, you write about the different certifications, and then you mention different projects which you have done. Right? So you write the projects from maybe 1, 2, 3, 10 projects, 10 such projects in your resume. Maybe you write the name of the project, or you write the name of the project and then you write certain descriptions of the project also. All right. But what happens is whatever you write in a resume is a verbal thing. What I mean by that is it's a trust basis. So for the employer, I can only trust that whatever you have written in your resume is true. I can only trust that. Now, if you are very good in writing a resume, if you have used intelligent words where you have used certain technical things which an employer just sees in the resume and understand that if he's written these projects in this fashion, probably he has actually done those projects also. All right. So that is totally depend on how your resume writing skills are. Second thing, it also depends on the employer's perspective also. So for a very technical employer, if you have written the project within the project section, if you have mentioned it very articulately, where you have used certain technical terms which only a technical person can understand. So for a technical employer from a very technical background, again, it is easier to trust that person that, okay, this person has done this project. But most of the time your resume will go to a non-technical person, maybe the HR head or maybe the department head, who is just worried about selecting certain resume and rejecting certain resumes. All right. So in that scenario, again, that person will not be. I mean, it depends, like how he sees things. So that person might select your resume, might not select your resume based on how good your resume looks like. Right? Now here comes the thing, that if you have a GitHub account where you have not only just added your projects on your resume, you have also added the whole source code of all of your projects within your GitHub account. So GitHub is a platform, it's a cloud-based platform where you can push your repositories. We'll show you how to do that. But since you're just assuming that you already know that we can push our source code within GitHub, and now since it is available in the cloud, and when I say in the cloud, basically anyone can access it. So let's say you have created a repository within your GitHub account, made it public, and added the link of that repository within your resume. So when you do that, what happens is whenever I go through your resume or an employer go through your resume, and if they found that your GitHub link or maybe a clickable link with each project, and if they can just simply click on that link and they are directed towards your project section within GitHub, they can see that you have actually written the codes for it. They can see the results. They can see everything you have done. So this gives an amount of validation for you. So amount of validation means it's not just theoretical. It's your knowledge is not just theoretical. Your knowledge is not just written. It is actually you have done those projects. So it gives a validation to your profile, right? So that obviously increases your chances to be selected, right? At least in the initial phases. So that is definitely a plus point. So I would recommend everyone to have a GitHub profile. If again repeating, it's not necessary that you only have GitHub profile. If you want, if you are more comfortable with any other version control system, go ahead and do that. But you should have some profile, right? So this basically becomes a technical validation to your profile section. So apart from having a resume and theoretical blogs which you write, you can also have a profile where you already have added the projects also, right? Now, having said that, just having any codes or any projects within your GitHub profile is also not recommended. So don't push garbage in it. In fact, in the next slide, we are going to discuss about that what kind of project we should push in GitHub, what are the different things which we should check for. So should we push any code which we have in our local system or develop during our career into GitHub? Or should we select certain projects and only push those projects? If we push a particular project in our GitHub profile which is public, are there any criteria? Sorry, are there any criteria which those projects should fill? Is there any format in which we should create those projects? We will look into different ways you can create projects. What are the recommendations? How we should create project? How you can create modular structure within your project? We will see how to write the codes. Should we follow certain compliance and standards? Should we use classes, objects, modules, and all those things? So basically, we look into how to become a good developer, so that when an employer sees your projects, he not only gets he or she not only just get the validation that the projects you have done those projects, but then more often than not, that employer will also open certain files of your projects. So it should not reflect an aspect of you in terms that you are a bad programmer. So your project should also reflect the fact that you are a good programmer, you are a good developer. So how to create that impression, we will discuss again. All right. So now, since we have discussed why to use GitHub, as I said, now we should move on to what kind of projects we should put on GitHub. All right. So now I'll keep my discussion very specific to data science, although almost anything which I'm saying is not limited to data science. I mean, this is valid for any market, whether you talk about a software developer or you talk about any other domain also, right? But given the context of your backgrounds or your careers, I'll keep my discussions to data science, and I'll keep taking the examples of data science projects itself. All right. Now, first thing is as I have said, you should not put all of your projects on GitHub. In fact, you can put all of your projects on GitHub, but you should not make all of your projects as public. All right. So you should. So in GitHub, when you create your account on GitHub, I'll just a while we are going to come to that, and I'll show you how to do that. When you create an account on GitHub and when you create a repository, it will give you an option to create a private repository. It will also give you an option to create a public repository. So now, given which projects you want to expose to everyone versus which projects you want to keep it only for yourself, you should set the access levels. All right. So my personal recommendation, push everything to GitHub so that it becomes easier for you to use. So even the garbage projects which you are just doing for practice or some tutorials, push it to GitHub. But make those privates, make public only those projects which you want to show to the recruiters. So maybe select maybe 4, 5 or 3 or 4 projects. So at least 3 to 4 projects you should have within your GitHub as your portfolio projects. You can call them as showing your different skill sets. So now as you are all into data science domain and you know that data science is not a small field, data science in itself is a very, very big field, very large field. Within data science itself, there could be different type of data scientists. So just for example, I can have a computer vision specialist, I can have an NLP specialist, I can have an application data scientist who are more into deploying stuff, developing Dockers, Kubernetes. I can have a computer vision people who are more, obviously they know all of them knows the fundamentals of data science, but their specialization is more into image processing, dealing with image data sets, video data sets, those kind of things. I can have people who are more into NLP, like whose specialization is more into dealing with different text data, NLP kind of problem sets, question answering systems, recommendation engines. So I can have those data scientists, and I can have different other data scientists who are more into the analytics parts. So by analytics, maybe a data scientist who is more into time series analytics, dealing with stock market data or panel data, these kind of stuff. I can have data scientists who are maybe visualization engineer, I can call them. So like they again are data scientists, but they are more into how to present your results. So creating different dashboards, whether it's using Tableau or Dash or any other such libraries. I can have data scientists like that. So now, since you know that there are different subcategories within data science, depending on which kind of data scientist you become, you should have 1 or 2 projects in that domain. But then you should also have a varied skill set also. So what I mean by that is, if you are at the beginning, if you are not very sure at your career or very rigid that I always only want to become a computer vision, if you have already thought about this, that I only want to become a computer vision scientist, then go ahead and create as many projects related to computer vision as possible within your profile. That's okay. Similarly, if you think that you only want to be in an NLP domain, create as many projects within the NLP domain itself. All right. But if you are a beginner, if you are an entry-level data scientist who is not really sure, who is open to different domains, which will be like 90% of the people, which I was also at the beginning of my career, that I'm okay with entering into multiple domains, experiencing projects related to multiple domains. So if that is the case, then I should be very selective in my projects. And when I say selective in my projects is, I should select those projects to showcase to my employer, to add into as my portfolio projects in GitHub, those projects which are different or varied in nature in their applications. Although the core is going to remain same, but I would like to have my profile in such a way that there is one project which is related to computer vision, there is another project which is related to NLP also, there is another project which showcase my programming skills, there is another project which showcase my dashboarding skills or visualization skills. So this way what I'm doing is I'm keeping my options open. So I have options of different employers, and even if the employer is looking for something, maybe computer vision projects, they have that also, and they also know that I have other skill sets also, right? So selecting those projects is going to be very, very critical, and in fact you should all pay some time. Not only just randomly select any project, but spend some time, think about it very carefully about what projects you should put, what kind of impression those projects are going to make for you in the eyes of the employers. All right. Okay. Next thing, while selecting the project is not only you should think about that the projects are of varied in nature in their application, they are from different domain. You should also think in terms of like what problems are the project solving. All right. So whenever you select a particular project, you should, first recommendation is stay away from academic projects, simple academic projects like you might have done. Now, I'm not saying that don't do academic projects, do academic projects, but it's not a good recommended thing to do showcase to your employer. So let's say you go on Kaggle, you find Titanic dataset, and then do some analysis on the Titanic dataset for survival analysis. All right, it's good for learning. You should definitely do this, but you should not select this project as your portfolio project, because this gives an impression that you have only worked with maybe academic projects, or maybe you have only worked with things which are available on internet. What you should show as a project portfolio project is projects which are solving real world problems, real business problems. All right, now to define what a real business is, it's a bit complicated. Now let me give you an example to showcase this. So let's say some of you are working with a company as a data engineer. I'll take that as an example because this happens a lot with most of the students. So let's say you're working as a data engineer, or maybe a software engineer who is not a data scientist, but you want to become a data scientist in your career, and that is why you're doing this course, and you want to switch your career from a developer, or from a business analyst, or from a data engineer to data science domain. Right? Now, while doing this course, you might have done multiple hackathons, you might have done maybe your projects also, or maybe while doing this course, or maybe on internet also, you might have on Kaggle, you might have found several projects and you have implemented those projects also. So you, in one hand, you have one of these projects which you think is good enough, maybe some projects related to Amazon review prediction. All right, so an Amazon review prediction you are doing. Within that Amazon review prediction, you have a data set of different reviews of Amazon customers, and you have done a classification whether those reviews are correct, or whether these reviews are positive or negative, these kind of. So this is one project which you have found on the internet. But the thing is, like, there are a lot of people are doing the same thing. A lot of people have actually done this project, and it's quite well known. This data set is quite well known. Similarly, you might have a project related to a news classification, like News 20 group data set, which is again very popular, but a real data set, which you have done a project related to that also. Right? So that is one option to showcase for you to showcase as your project. On the other hand, since you are working in the current company where you are working as a data engineer, you have access to certain data sets, let's say sales data sets. So although you are a data engineer, your task was only to do sales, store the data in the database, maintain them and all those. But you have access to those sales database, maybe a database related to different clients and their prospective information related to those customers, like the age of the customer's name, what has been the history of that customer. So you have this data also available with you. Now, in your current company, you don't work as a data scientist, so you're not required to do any data science task there. But you have the option where you have talked to your manager and you have said that I want to use this data for my own learning purpose and just showcase certain skill sets. All right. So you took this data set, your manager says, okay, whatever, I don't care, till as long as you are doing the task assigned to you, I'm okay with some bit allowing you to learn certain things using our company's data set. So you took that data, and maybe you fit a maybe very simple model like a logistic regression or support vector machine to predict maybe who is going to be the next prospective customers, which you should focus on. And you have created this project, a simple model, a very simple model, and then you have created maybe a nice simple report which you want to present to your boss, that I have done this analysis using the data set which is available in the company, and I found that if we go through approaching these customers, we are having 60% more likelihood to have a success compared to if we just select those customers randomly. So it's a typical use case of lead generation. But anyways, you have taken a real data set from your current company. I've done this analysis. When you present it to your boss says, okay, fine, I'm good. I'll talk to the senior management, and if they allow, we will pursue this project. But there is no guarantee. Now, what I'm trying to explain to you here is, if you have both these scenarios where you have done this project which was not asked to you, also the project was quite simpler compared to maybe an Amazon reviews classification, where it was an NLP project where you have taken a data set, you need to do different NLP pre-processing, and then you needed to do certain kinds of manipulation on the data, word vectorization, and then classification and all those activities. On the other hand, you have a project where you have done a simple logistic regression or maybe some support vector machine to do a modeling or a classification task. All right. So you have two projects. one is more complex than the other, but the more complex one is an academic in nature, while the other one is more in real in scenario, I would select the second one, which is basically modeling the customer part. The reason why I would select that as my portfolio projects over the review classification, the reason is that is a real world problem which you are solving. All right. So for a particular employer, it is always more relevant to see a real world problem, real world project to be solved, because there was a real data set which you are using. There was a real world problem which you have found out that this is a problem, and you have solved that. And if that is being utilized by your company, it's excellent. Even if it is not utilized by your company, it still gives a certain validation that your knowledge is not limited to certain academic things. All right. So just giving you this example to tell you that what should you prefer in terms of your portfolio projects. So I would always prefer to have less complex but more real problems to be solved. So the solution itself is not the solution itself is not that relevant. The problem is also very relevant in nature. So what I mean by that is, maybe your solution is simple, but what you want to express through your project is you want to express that you have solved a particular problem from beginning till the end, rather than explain to the employer that I know these algorithms. All right. Nobody is interested in what algorithms you know. Nobody is interested in how you solve the problem. Everyone is interested in whether you are capable of solving a business problem or not. All right. So this is very important to understand that you want to make an impression in a way that you are a problem solver. Now, depending on the problem type, you decide your solutions, and not vice versa. It is not that you have certain solutions and you try to fit those solutions on certain problems. It should not be like that. You take the problem, you understand, you read the problem, you convert that business problem into machine learning problem. Maybe some part of the problem statement is being solved by machine learning, while some others are being solved by simple logic, and then you combine all of this, and then again at the end you solve this complete problem. So try to add projects within your portfolio which solves a complete business problem. That is always going to give you an advantage. All right. And also, while explaining those projects while during your interview, it is always going to be an advantage for you when you explain that this is the problem I had and why you went through a particular approach. So explaining those projects. All right. Okay. Next question is like I've talked about like what kind of problem statement you should select. Next is coming to more focus more on the solution aspect, and on the solutions aspect, I would always recommend to have a solution which is complete in nature. And when I say complete in nature, what I mean is try to build end-to-end solutions. So we always have this habit of creating a solution which is like good, and by good, what I mean is like a solution which has done a very good analysis. Like let's again take this example of Amazon reviews classification. So we'll download this data set manually from some data set repository, and then we will start with a notebook. We will load the Excel sheet, we will perform our analysis on that Excel sheet, and then we will keep on presenting the results, like creating different visualizations and graph within that notebook, and we are done. All right. So this is usually the habit which we have. Now you need to change this slightly. Now what I mean by this is all good for learning purpose. This is all good for during the initial phase of your career when you are learning different things, performing analysis. But this is no good during your production. And when I say production, what I mean is, think about it. Like the notebook which you have created, is it useful to anyone? Whatever notebook which you have created, where you have loaded the data and performed different analysis, you have created a model and you have shown that you have achieved 80% of accuracy. Now, what good is that notebook to me as a user? So if I am as a user, one is interested in something, how is your notebook useful to me until and unless I actually do some copy pasting of your code, like certain functions I think. So basically, if I am a developer myself, I'm a data scientist myself, I can copy paste certain functions from your notebook. Otherwise your notebook is no good to anybody, other than the fact that it just showcases that you have the skill set to do analysis, you have the skill set to perform NLP, you have the skill set to use a scikit-learn algorithm. All right. So your project should be created in such a way that it becomes usable to others also. When I say usable to others, what it means is it should be an end-to-end solution where it should deal with different aspects of your solution. What are those different aspects? It should start with the data gathering aspect itself, like where you have collected those data. So your projects, your problem statement itself contains that problem also. So collecting the data from the source, how your data is being collected, that should be the one part. Once you have collected the data, next thing would be what did you do with the data? Where did you store the data? So if you are storing them as an Excel sheet, okay, that is also fine. But most of the time, that is not the most elegant solution. So you might be typically prone to using certain databases. So if you're using certain database like structured database like SQL or MySQL, try to include that also within your projects itself. If you are using certain other data sets like a node distributed data sets like Elasticsearch or Cassandra, MongoDB, you should showcase that skills also within your project. So that part of data storage. Once you have done the data ingestion plus data storage, then what did you do with that data? So you might typically do certain pre-processing on the data. I would typically call it as the data processing. All right. Now data processing could be multifaceted. Like there could be multiple things which you are doing in the data processing. You might want to join two tables and store it separately. You might want to do certain pre-processing operations like doing those data cleaning aspects. Now, depending on what type of data, you might do certain things like missing value filling, outlier detection. So all these activities again become part of your project. Once you have done this, maybe you have went through certain feature engineering, then you might have done certain modeling. So your project should include everything, starting from the data collection process till not only just the modeling, but even after the modeling. Now, what is after the modeling? So let's say you have done the modeling also, you have created the model also, and you have again done some performance evaluation also. We have shown your model is performing good. Now, how is the model being utilized by someone else? How can someone else utilize your model, use your model for their own purpose? All right. So that can also be shown through your project itself. Now, how you can show that? By converting your project into a deployable project. All right. Now, what comes under deployment? So first thing, I mean, like a very basic way of deploying your project could be convert your project into whatever model which you have created, convert your model into an API maybe. So Flask is a very good tool to do that. I'll just come to this aspect. I'll talk a little bit more in detail about this. So you should think about this, like how you can create an API out of your model. If you are comfortable with Flask, use Flask. There is no limitation that you should only use Flask. You can use Django, or you can use Bottle, or you can use any other tool which whatever suits you. All right. Next thing would be, once you have converted your API into Flask or something in API, do you want to convert this into containers? Typically, containers are very popular these days, which solves the problem of dependency. In fact, it provides isolation. Again, not going to too much technical depth about Dockers and containers, just recommending you that if you think that your project the deployment requires containers, include that Docker file also within your project. I would not recommend right now in a project section to go into Kubernetes and a Kubernetes deployment file. But if someone is from that background who is very good at these aspects, maybe you can create a Kubernetes deployment file like a service file also if you want within your project. Now, what this does is it gives the employer an idea and impression that you are not just a theoretical data scientist. You know the complete aspect, what we call as full stack data scientist, that you are aware about from the data collection process till the deployment process. Now, don't get confused here that a data scientist is expected to do all these activities within the job. No, it is not like that. Typically, most of the organizations will have dedicated teams of data engineers. They will have dedicated teams of full stack engineers also. They will have dedicated team of DevOps engineers also, right? Who is going to assist the data scientist in doing the data scraping part and the deployment part, right? But the data scientist should be aware about all these activities. They should not be dependent on everyone. All right. So if you have all of these knowledge, if you can showcase all of these things within your project itself, that you can come to create an end-to-end solution that tells you that you are going to be a very good fit in that team, where you can speak the common tongue with all of the different people available. And sometimes, in fact, within certain startups where they have limitations on their resource side, maybe the data scientist is expected to do all of these also. So maybe the data scientist is expected to do the data engineering part also and the deployment part also. Right? So I'm not asking everyone to become a complete or DevOps engineer, complete full stack engineer, but knowing those things, be able to deploy a simple application is always a good thing. And if you know those things, try to showcase that within your portfolio project also. All right. Okay. As I've said, within the project section, you should select certain selective projects which showcase your different data science skill sets, and those skill sets could be multifaceted in terms of the domain. It could be multifaceted in terms of the different applications also. Okay. This is just a generic structure of showing how a generic machine learning project should look like. So as I've been discussing all along, so it should start with the data retrieval process itself. Now the data retrieval process could be simple. If the data is available in the form of Excel sheet, it is simple enough. If it is not available in the form of Excel sheet, if it is available in the form of in some database, so your code should contain the different connection strings to fetch those data from the different data sets. So let's say if the data is available in MySQL, how do you fetch the data from MySQL? Or if it is available in MongoDB or Cassandra or HBase or any other distributed database, how you are going to fetch that data? So that data retrieval system itself should be present within your project. Next thing, maybe your data is not actually available in some database, it is available in some form of API or maybe some streaming data set. All right, so maybe let's say you are fetching Twitter data. So Twitter data is available to you in the form of streams. So how do you manage streaming data? So your code again should contain that aspect also. Like if you are handling streaming data, either you can create a scheduler which fetches the data from alternatively after a certain time, maybe a fixed interval of time of 5 minutes or something. Or you want to go to a complete streaming system, maybe you are using something like a RabbitMQ or Kafka. Your code should contain that aspect also. So depending on what kind of project, so this data retrieval process itself could be simple. This data retrieval process itself could be complex also. Yes, Atul, please go ahead.
Sajjad, can you hear me?
Atul has a question that what's the best way to convert Excel to CSV in data pipeline? I did not understand, Atul, if you just want to convert your Excel into CSV, it depends on what data you have, and just doing a conversion, you can do it just one line of code within Python. You can read the data in form of Excel and you can save it as a CSV, but you have to be very careful here that an Excel file can contain multiple sheets while a CSV file will not contain multiple sheets. So if that is the case, like the Excel file only contains single sheet, you can just read the file and just again save it, or you can, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So Sajjad, actually, yes, in our what you have shown, we are actually deploying an ML pipeline, and I feel that the knowledge of only being a data science is not enough for this. Actually, you rightly pointed out in practical world. Actually, so one of the challenge we are facing is that multiple sheets Excel, which is being generated as a data set actually. And we want to read it in our data retrieval, data processing and wrangling thing. Okay, but then only ways we can do it with CSV. We tried that approach, but it doesn't work actually. And I have not come across any solution where I could practically convert it. So still that step is manual for us actually to delete those.
You don't need. No, you don't need this activity to be manual. So a very simple way of doing this, like if you are using pandas, just read the pandas.
That's slow basically. Each and every Excel is around 500 plus MBs. Actually.
Yes, I understand. That will be definitely be slow.
Yeah. So whenever we run that UI and in Flask, typically if we read a CSV, it takes maybe a minute to showcase. But if we use this Excel to CSV converter, it takes around 18 to 20 minutes. In fact, it's 5 to 6 times we have seen.
I agree with that aspect. That is going to take. So what you can do is you can create a scheduler which does this activity automatically. Like whenever your file arrives, so which is irrespective of your data pipeline process. So see, why I'm saying this is, directly if you do a conversion from Excel to CSV, there are ways to do that. Like I can, without reading the file, I can convert the Excel to CSV data. But when I do that, definitely I'm going to lose all of the rest of the sheets. I will only the first sheet is going to remain with you. So that is one way. But since you have multiple sheets, you want to save each sheet separately. So there is no other way I can think of right now. There could be maybe if I do certain research, but I cannot think of any other way where I can, without reading the Excel sheet, I can save them at separate CSV. Because let's say if your Excel sheet contains maybe 3 sheets, you need to read the Excel first to save each individual sheets as CSV.
Yes, right.
I don't think I can think about anything else. But what you can do is, as I said, like since you are clicking on a UI and waiting for 18 minutes, rather than doing that, what you can do is you can just create a job, maybe a cron job, that which whenever a Excel sheet or a new Excel sheet arrives at a particular location, it reads that sheet and it converts those into an Excel is different CSV, and it saves that in a certain destination location. So it will run in background for you without waiting for you to click. Does that make
You mean to
sense?
say all subsheets can be done that way, in the sense in an Excel maybe, or
Yes,
through cron
absolutely,
jobs?
absolutely.
Okay, okay. Makes sense.
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's a nice suggestion. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll explore this actually option.
So you can use
Thanks.
cron jobs, or if you are using Airflow, you can use that also as scheduler. Depending. If you have
Okay.
anything further related to this, do ping me on Slack. Later on, we can have a discussion around them. Right?
Sure, Sajjad. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Welcome.
Sajjad, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, please go
I
ahead.
just need a few seconds of yours. I'll just
Sure.
launch a short poll on the learner screen, and it will take just a few seconds. Just give me a few seconds.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Sajjad. Guys, I'm launching a short poll, quick poll on your screen. Kindly take the poll. It won't take
Yeah, sure.
more than a few seconds.
Sure.
Yeah. Guys, you can start taking the poll. It's just a couple of questions. And I would like everyone to take it, please. Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot for taking the poll. So I'm ending the poll now. Thank you, Sajjad. You can continue.
All right. Thanks, Vijay.
Yeah.
Sure, thanks. Okay, so as I was talking, we should pay attention to this data retrieval project aspect, and then next thing which comes which is data preparation, where you should include all the aspects of pre-processing till doing some feature engineering depending on what kind of data which you have, and then comes the modeling part, and then you will do the evaluation part. All right. So doing this activity is fine, but then this last box is very critical for me. And in fact, when I look into a project, if I find this deployment aspect within the project, it gives me a very good impression about that particular person. So again, I'm repeating, in my team, I hire people. I have a dedicated DevOps person who does this activity. I myself do a lot of DevOps activity myself, but I always expect, in fact, I have all my data scientists within my team I've had at least know the fundamentals of DevOps also. So even if the DevOps guys are absent there, I'm very sure about this. I'm very confident that my data scientists can deploy their projects themselves without the help of DevOps scientists. Okay? So having that skill set is always going to add a value to your resume, and it's going to add a value to your profile. Okay. Now certain things about within the project, some bullet points. When you push a certain project within your GitHub profile, there are certain features which you should maintain about that project. One thing is, obviously you should write good coding practices. So like you should not write bad codes. Now what constitutes a good code, what constitutes a bad code can be a completely separate discussion, but what I just want to explain you is the coding standard, the coding style itself is going to create a long lasting impression in the minds of the employer. So when you write a code, although it is working, but that code itself can be written in 10 different ways. So how you write, pay attention to how you write those codes. Now, if you're not sure about these practices, if you have never heard about these things, do try to learn a few things which I would say. Just try to learn PEP 8 and PEP 257 compliance. So just Google about what is PEP 8, what PEP 257 is. You would learn a lot of things. In fact, they are very basic compliance which is very specific to Python. Now, this is very specific to Python. If you're working with certain other languages, they will have their own compliance. So PEP 8 is more about like how you should name your variables. Like there is a standard that all of your variable names should start with a lowercase. If you're starting with a class name should always start with a uppercase. You should use underscore to separate different subwords within a variable. So depending on although PEP 8 specifies that you should use snake case, you can use the other different ways also, right? So camel case, you can use camel case also, you can use snake case, but the idea here is whenever you write your code should have certain compliance, certain standards, and it should be more readable. Typically we call 4 basic pillars of writing codes, which is your code should be scalable, reusable, maintainable, and explainable. All right, so try to pay attention to these activities, things also. When you write your code, apart from following this compliance, you should have a modular structure to your code. That is not write everything within one file. So try to bucket the different applications. So maybe anything related to a database should be written in a different database file, while anything related to maybe the feature engineering should be in one file. Anything related to maybe doing a data pre-processing should be written in one file. So these files, individual files in Python, we call those as modules. So your code should follow this modular structure. Then within the modular structure, and within a particular module also, you can have multiple classes. So don't try to just write linear code. Try to use classes and functions. So maybe anything related to connection to database, maybe you have created a class named as data connection, and within that connection you might have created different multiple functions, and within those functions you might have written like this is function to connect with MongoDB, this is the function to connect with MySQL, so things like that. All right, so try to follow these structures. Another thing is like when you use all of these structures, when you create your projects. In fact, I'll just show you one of the projects, one sample projects where I'll show you different good things about that project, and then I'll also show you different bad things about that project also. All right, so you should try to follow those things. Also, when you create your projects, it's always good that you also provide a test file. What a test file is, you have not only just created the project, you also created a test file with the test. What the purpose of test file is, the test file demonstrate how to use your code. So let's say you have created this review classification project. Now you have created a test file where you have created a function, and you have explained that you just need to call this function, pass the review and pass this parameter, and then press enter or whatever, and this is going to return this. So what is the input going to the test and what is the output going to the test? All right, so depending on how you have created your project, if you have created an API to demonstrate that test file, how to use that API, that is what is the request type you are going to send, whether you are going to send post request or get request, what is the body, what is the format of the input, so demonstrating that. All right, so that is always good to have. Also, you can always have a short demo tutorial. So like maybe if you can create a small video of how to use your project, that is always great. Even if you don't create a video, maybe a short tutorial where you write the commands how to utilize your project, or maybe if you have converted your projects to an installable file like a package, so how to install those packages, so pip install whatever package name. So demonstrating that also is always a good thing to have within your project. All right. And next thing is obviously, apart from these, if you want to provide certain links to different projects, you can always provide those links. It is always good to have them. Okay. I would like to demonstrate certain projects. So let me start with this one. So just to show you what kind of projects could be a good project. Now, I'm not saying that this is the ideal project which you should follow. There are certain things which is lacking within this project also. So I would focus on what are the things which are good within this, and you should have those. All right. Okay. So as you can see, a few things within this project. One thing is which I would really like is every good project will always have a readme.md file. All right. Now, when you create a repository within GitHub, you will always have this option of start with a repository, initialize file. All right. So we'll see it just in a while. All right. So you should always have a readme.md file. Now, the readme.md file will be displayed by default within your GitHub. All right. So whatever you write within this file, whatever I write within this file is actually displayed. So whatever I write within this file, I actually displayed in my profile. So when in my home page of my projects, and this should contain a documentation thing within my projects, and you can write HTML within this also. So it could be a simple text file where you write a simple text set of instructions in a text file, or you can do certain fancy things like you have added an image also. You have created an HTML where you can provide clickable links, so navigation becomes easier. All right. So now having this is in fact becomes very useful, and it is very good to have that anybody using your project would be simply just read this documentation and is able to use your project without doing too much research on the code aspect. All right. So that is one good thing about this project. Next thing is all of your projects, you can see this .gitignore file. Now what this .gitignore file means is when you're committing your projects, when you're pushing, when you're doing the commit of your projects, there are certain files which you might not want to push. All right. So if you don't want to push a certain file, you add those within this .gitignore file. So typically in Python, you might have like when you run your Python programs, there are like specifically with notebooks, you might see the .ipynb checkpoints files. You know? So these files are checkpoint files which you don't want to maintain or push to your repository. So you can eliminate this. So how you have written is star dot. So anything ending with this extension you don't want to add. Similarly, the data itself you would not like to push into your repository. So maybe your data is 10 gigabytes, you don't want to push 10 gigabytes into the repository. So maybe adding that data folder itself, the complete data folder, not to be pushed within your repository. So that is also another thing. So whatever you don't want to push, whatever you don't want to commit, you should add within this .gitignore file. So now apart from having this readme and gitignore file, you can also have a license. So if you are working for a company, if you have a specific license, you can add that license. If not, you can use some open source license, like typically we have OpenGNU license or MIT license. You can just copy paste this and you can have as a license. All right. So if you are using open source, MIT has a very good open source license. So you should create that also. Another very important thing which is very good is you should always have a requirement.txt file. Now what this requirement.txt file means, I'm not really sure how many of you are aware about creating virtual environments within Python and all those things, but you should definitely learn about how to create virtual environments in Python. And in fact, every Python, specifically if you are working with Python, every Python project should be started with a virtual environment. Now, what a virtual environment is? A virtual environment is an environment which you can create specific to your project related to your typical installations of different libraries. So whenever you install a particular library, those libraries are installed directly. If you do a pip install that library name, it will be installed within your main Python environment. All right. So you don't want that. So because maybe when you are installing a library, and if you are, let's say, 2 or 3 projects, one project requires NumPy greater than maybe 0.2, while another project requires NumPy equals to 0.18. So if you have installed 0.18, one project will work, other one will not work. So, and same the vice versa. So one solution to this is you buy one laptop for each individual project. So maybe if you have 10 projects, you buy 10 laptops, and whenever you want to run, you take that laptop. So instead of doing that, what is recommended is rather than buying 10 laptops, save your money and just create virtual environment for each project. So for a project, whatever packages I need, I can create a virtual environment for that, and I can install those packages only for that project within that particular virtual environment. All right. And a requirement.txt file is very easy way to maintain that. Like within the requirement.txt, you can specify all the specific dependencies or different projects which you want to implement, which you want to install for that particular project. So I've specified scikit-learn greater than this. So when I do pip install requirement.txt, it will install this specific package, and I will do that this install within my virtual environment. All right. So if you don't know how to create virtual environment, you can just Google and search, and it is just 2 or 3 steps. You can definitely go and do that. All right. But just letting you know that you should do this. All right. Coming to next, as you can see, the different projects are explained here in different modules. Like you have one project related to churn study, which is one a different module. We have one related to movie recommender again, which is in a different module. All right. So you should have this also, the structure. Now within this project, this is the thing which I would not like to have within the project. So like it's a very linear project where it is just one notebook file which is explaining the whole project. I would not like my project to have this. All right. So what I would like is my project should actually be a modular project. So this churn study itself is a complete project. So I would like to have a complete modular structure to my project. So maybe create multiple files, multiple modules, in fact, multiple folders. So in fact, let me just show you some of the projects. Okay. So rather than showing that, I'm just trying to show you maybe how you should structure your code. Which one should I? Okay. Okay. So maybe you you should follow this kind of structure where you have this bin folder, data folder, docs folder. So within data folder you have all the data sets. Similarly, within bin folder you should have different scripts which is written. Within this also again you can have further folders like data pre-processing, data engineering, feature engineering, modeling, deployments, and all this. So you should structure your code like that. All right. Okay. Similarly, within this you can see different. In this particular case, it's all notebooks. In fact, I can show you one of the notebooks. Let's see how the notebook looks like. So now within this notebook, almost all of the analysis is being shown. So it is good to have this. But again, I'm reiterating that having this notebook is fine, where you have demonstrated all the results, improvements, but then you should always create your complete project in the form of deployable things. So deployable things means you should have Python scripts, those Python scripts where the model, how the model is loaded, when the model is loaded, or maybe when your model is trained from the data sets, how to save that model so that model is saved, and then another program which can load that saved model and just do the prediction, and then maybe another file which converts your project into a API. So maybe a file created using Flask to convert that, and if you are using Docker and containers, then you include that Docker file also. All right. You can in fact go to my own profile and see some of the good projects. And when you create all of these projects, typically your profile should look like this, like you have different things which you do and all of these things are reflected here. All right. Okay, let me come back to this. Let's see one other project. Okay. Again, some of the things you will find common with respect to the previous one. All right. So as you can see, we have a license file, README file. It doesn't have a requirement.txt file, which you should have. All right. Ideally, as you can see, it has a separate folder for data. So whether the data is present, and then within we can go within the projects, and you can see with here we have some helper files. Typically, like different smaller functions which you want to include within your project, you should add them as a different Python files. All right. So you should include that. So again, just giving you an overview, you can explore it later on. All right. Now let's show you how to use Git. Yes, please go ahead.
Sajid. Yeah, I've seen that some of the suggestion was to use a cookie cutter structure. If you could kindly help us understand and give an overview if you have some information on the cookie cutter structure.
Programming structure?
Cookie cutter structure for GitHub for data science projects.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So in fact, let me do one thing. Let us see if I have certain projects added within my profile or not.
Because that has the various folders you were talking about. Cookies.
Yeah, let me just see if I have certain projects within my own profile. Yeah, maybe this might be a sample structures. So typically I structure my code like this. So like I have a folder called codes, and within that itself I could have, typically you will have multiple modular structure of the code. So anything related to coding I should have within this folder. Now this is something which I follow. It is not necessary that you also follow the exact same thing. All right. Now within this, so this is a very small demo file to create a sample API using Flask. I have a data folder, I have a results folder, I have a README, I have a requirement.txt. Now this config file is very important for me. So typically right now I don't have a config file, maybe I somewhere. So how I do is, like, you should not have any, I can have a complete separate discussion on the complete coding practices. But anyways, whenever you write your code, you should not have anything hard coded within your code. So anything related to path, users, credentials, you should not write anything related to that within your code itself. So I typically always have a config folder, and within that config folder I have different config files, and config files are typically YAML files. So within that YAML file I would have this different structure, like for this database, and then username, password, and I'll have this. So whenever I want to change that username of a particular database, I just need to change the config file. I don't need to go to the whole code and change that. All right. So this is one thing which you should follow. Next thing is, typically have this results folder, and after the results folder I also have usually have a cache folder. So cache folder is like where you store temporary results. So let's say you are doing a scraping job. So scraping job, maybe you get a new link and you scrape that, or maybe you fetch that data from internet. But if you have already scraped that link, you don't want to fetch. So you typically do some sort of caching. So you can implement this caching mechanism yourself, all right? Or if you are using certain other programming language, they have a very good caching mechanism there. Just letting you know that is also an important thing which I usually take care. Within this code section itself, so within this code section itself, I typically have these files, and I also usually have a helper folder. So within that helper folder, in fact, I can maybe later on add a project within my profile. You can check in my profile. I'll add a project which is demonstrative of all of these. So within the helper folder, I typically have certain utility functions which are common in nature to almost all of my projects. So whenever I create a new project, so let's say I'm related to project is related to NLP. So within NLP, there are certain things like doing stemming, tokenization, all this. These are the things which is required almost in every project. So I don't add it to my main project, rather I add it to my helper project. So within that helper project, I keep on adding these functions which are very, very generic in nature. All right. So in any other project, I can just use this and directly. So my code is very like I try to decouple the different aspects of my program, and it create an isolation between the different modules. All right. So I try to do this thing whenever I follow. Okay. So just showing you these things, maybe I can, if I have certain other projects which might be more demonstrative of this fact. Let's say this dashboards, what do we have? Okay, yeah, you can follow this one, very good. It's a very good project, in fact, to showcase this skill. So it's with respect to the deployment also. So this is basically a project related to deploying a dashboard and how you can deploy a dashboard, and you can see this complete project available here. So within this, you can see from the deployment aspect, what you can see is they also have this .docker file. So for each of them, they have created this Docker files also. Again, I'm not going to the details of Dockers, how the Dockers are created. So you can see this Docker file. Now this Docker file constitutes the whole set of instructions how to build your project from the scratch. All right. Now again, I'm not going to the details of how to create Dockers and all. That is going to take complete separate time. But just letting you know that if you are interested, you should include these also. All right. Okay, now just we will spend some last moment. So again, I'm not going to give you a tutorial how to use Git, but what I'm going to give you is like within Git some of the very simpler. If you are already aware of it, good enough. If you are not aware of it, some intro into like what are these different terminologies. All right. So just to show you within Git, what happens is like. Typically you will have this working directory, right? So just explaining the structure how Git works. All right. So typically you are always going to have a working directory, you are going to have a staging area, and you are going to have a local repository. Now this is all within your local system. All right. So within your local system, you are going to have a working directory, staging area, and local repo, and then you have a remote system. So remote system is the GitHub part. So which is where your data is stored within the remote repository within the cloud. All right. And within your local system itself, you will be having the local. So the local repository is the main repository which you have whatever files you have from the local repository, and then you have a working directory and you have a staging area. Now this is very important to understand what is the staging area. So whenever you add any files within your project, that files remains within your working directory. From that working directory, you first add it to a staging area. It cannot directly be added to the local repository. You always add it to the staging area. And once you have added to the staging area, depending on whether you have a conflict or not, you will again pass this data from staging area to the local repository. There's just some commands to showcase this movement. Like if you do a git add, your file is transformed from your working directory to the staging area. Then you do a commit to transfer the file from the staging area to the local repository. Now this is very important that whenever you do a git add, your file is not added to your repository. You always need to do a git commit. The reason is this, that is when you do a git add, it is only added to the staging area, not the repository area. Once it is added to the local repository, you can get content, you can just remain within this activity if you don't want to push your project to the cloud. But if you want to push the project to the cloud, then you will need to do a further git push to push it to the remote repository, and if you want to fetch it back, you can do a git pull. All right. So to move from local repository to the remote, you do a git push and git pull, and then there is git merge and git checkout also. So again, when you learn more about branching and merging, you will know this. So I'm not going to the details of every command, but let me just demonstrate. So these commands are written here. So like initially when you use git, you do a git config, then you do if you want to start a repository, you do a git init, and I'll show you, in fact directly show you using a demonstration itself. All right, so let me show you this using a demonstration. So let me take a project in fact, and in fact what I will do is, let me open my git profile. Yeah. So I am assuming that every one of you have git profile already created for you. So now having this, so what I will do is, you see this, first thing you will need is you will need to log in with your GitHub profile. So once you log in, if you are already logged in, you will click on this plus, and when you click plus, so now you can see all of these repositories added in my profile. But if I want to create a new repository, I just click on this new repository and I'll create this. All right, so let me call this as data science, maybe GA test. All right, so let's fine, that is fine. So I've created this, and within this I might provide certain descriptions. So maybe GitHub or DS tutorial. All right, so I can do this. You want to create private versus public, you can select this option, and if you are creating a completely new project, you can click on this initialize repository. So it will directly create a new repository with this readme file. All right, I typically don't want this because I want to create this readme file myself. So I will already have a project, I want to push this to this repository. So I'll not click on this, but if you want, you can click on this. Again, similarly, you have this option of adding the gitignore files here itself, but I'll again not do this. I'll do this myself within my own local repository. So I'll click on this create repository. So once you do this, it will automatically also give you the commands to perform push your projects within this remote repository. All right, but you are interested in this part. So you have this URL, which is I'm going to use to push my projects. All right, so now you have two types of URL, one is SSH and one is HTTPS. If I click on HTTPS, so it is this one. If I click on SSH, it is this URL. All right, so I'm going to use HTTPS for now. Again, not going to details of what is the difference between them. So let's start with the project. Okay, so which project I should use? Okay, now let me just take a very simple file. Which one can I use? Which one do I have? Okay, let's take this as an example. This is a very large file which I'll remove. All right, so let's start with this. Assuming this is not a Git project. So first thing is understand that this project is not added to Git. So what I mean by this is I'm not talking about GitHub. I'm talking locally. So locally this is not added to. This is not being version controlled. So what you can do is you can just start a terminal here. Do let me know if something is not visible. If you want me to increase the font size or something. Assuming that you are able to see all these things. So within this terminal, to start a Git project, I'll simply write git init. So when I write git init, so it creates this .git folder here. All right. So now my Git repository is created. Now once this is done, I will do a git add dot, or I can do a -a. All right. So -a means all, or dot also means all. Or if I want to add only certain files, I can provide the name also. So if I want to add only this file, I can provide this name. All right. So since this is the first time I'm adding this file, so that is why I'll do a dot to add every file. So once you do this, all my files are added here. So how I can check that? You can check using git status. So when you do this git status, it says that these are the files which are changes to be committed. Now remember, when I did this activity of git add, what happened is initially all these files were untracked. Now all of these files were transformed from a working directory to the staging area. All right. So now all these green files which you see, they are all within the staging areas. they are yet not within the Git local repository. All right, understand the difference between working directory and repository. Working directory is any physical file present here. Repository is the Git, which is remembering all of this. All right, so the repository, it has not been yet be transferred to the local repository. Now to transfer it to the local repository, I'll write git commit -m. So this git commit command is to transfer this from local repository, so from the staging area to the local repository. So git commit -m I do, and -m is for message, and I can write any message. So maybe there's not a good message, but okay, my first commit. But you should basically, this message should contain the information that what changes did you do, so that when you see those commits, you remember that why did you do this commit. All right. So when you do this, so you can see all of this has been committed. I can again do a git status. So you do a git status, you can see nothing to commit. Now everything is committed to your local repository. All right. Now this, till now it is all good, but still remember all of these has only been added to your local repository. It has not been added to the GitHub cloud. All right. So for that, I need to add this repository. So I've done all of these. I need to add this repository. To add the repository, I have this command. So I need this URL. So I'll take this URL. All right. I'll take this URL and I'll first tell this Git that this is my remote repository. I need to specify this path. So I'll do git remote add origin. So this command is to add the remote URL. In fact, I can show you, if you do just git remote -v, it will show you whether you have a git remote repository or not. So it shows empty. So right now I don't have a remote repository. So now I'll add the remote repository. So git remote add origin, and then within this I'll add that URL. Okay. So once I do this, if you do git remote -v again, so it will say that this is your push and this is your pull. All right. So now this remote repository has been added. All right. So now if it is added, I just need to do a git push. Now I can write git push origin master. So now if I write origin master, everything will be pushed into a master branch. Now I'm not going to the details of what are branches, but you can always create multiple branches of the same project. So by default, it is the master branch, but you can create as many branches as possible. All right. So if I want to add different branch, I should do git push origin branch 1, branch 2, dev, UAT, whatever you want to write. All right. So by default, I'll push it to the master branch. So when you do this, so now you can see all of the project files are being pushed to this. And once these are pushed, we should be able to see those files here. All right. So now it is being, all of these files are being pushed here. Let's refresh this page. And as you have refreshed this page, you can see all of these projects are pushed here. All right. So now you can see, I can expect this. I can see all of these things. All right. Now, this is not the ideal project to have. I was just demonstrating how to push a project to your Git repository. Now, the good thing about this, now I can fetch this project in any other directory also. So maybe let's assume that there is another user. There is another user who wants to use this. So let's create another repository, test repo. All right. And within this, user also wants to work on that project. So what he needs to do is he needs to clone that project. So I'll do a git clone, and then I'll provide that URL. So this URL basically. So here you can see this clone URL. You can see this URL. So I'll just copy this. So once I've copied this, as you can see, now it is fetching those data which I have. Yeah. So once this is done, I should have all the projects. Now you can see here there is a folder created automatically, GS test, and I have all the codes here. All right. So now you can think of as these two are two different users. Like this is one user, and similarly this guy is another user. All right. So these two are two different users who can work on parallel into this. And each one does certain changes, commits to this. This one does certain changes, commits to this, and push it. All right. And then if there will be a conflict, there will be a merge operation required, and the administrator can control all of these. So just a short demo of how to use Git. All right. Okay. So this is what I wanted to show you. You can definitely go into the documentation and learn a lot more about it. So the idea of this session was not to demonstrate the whole Git capabilities and give you a tutorial in Git, but the idea was to demonstrate the importance of using GitHub and how you can use GitHub within your data science. What I can do after this is, like, as someone has asked, I would add in maybe some of my own personal project, just so I not include all of the relevant codes, but yeah, that code will give you an idea about how to structure your projects. So I'll add that into my profile. I'll add the link into within Slack. So do keep checking, check Slack, and you can just refer to that. But then anyways, there are lots of other projects already available to you which you can refer to as documentation. But I will definitely provide certain links which you can refer to. All right. Okay. That is all from my side about using how to use GitHub and how it is. I hope that after this session, if you're already using Git, you will use it in a better way. If you're not using, you'll start using it from today itself. Always remember, utilizing certain source control system is not something which you can do after waking up someday. It is a habit which will build. All right. So you cannot just wake up someday and say that from today I'm going to use source control system. It is not going to happen like that. It becomes a habit, and almost all of the good developers will have this habit of committing their changes every 2 to 3 hours. So personally, I do at least 4 to 5 commits every day. So similarly, you should not wait for completing the whole project to do the commit or push it to the repository. You have written something, push this to your remote, commit those changes within your local, and also push this to your remote, and keep having this habit of doing this. Like every hour or so, you should push those changes. All right. What happens is, obviously, it safeguards your code. That is, if something goes wrong, if let's say your computer burns, so what happens? Your data is at least not lost, your code is not lost, and obviously it helps us in collaborating with different other users and having all those other advantages which we have discussed. All right. Having said that, I will end this session now. If anyone has any questions, I would be happy to answer.
Hi, Sajjad, this is Atul.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I have maybe not related with today's session in Git, but I just want to understand what are the options to deploy a data pipeline on premises where we don't use Git, but maybe Atlassian, Bitbucket, and all. What options do you see available in this periphery to do an end-to-end pipeline?
I'll give you an idea. Sure.
Yes, thanks.
So there are different things in deployment aspect. In fact, I'll show you. So one thing in deployment aspect is like, let's say you have said Bitbucket. Bitbucket is nothing. Again, Bitbucket is Stash is now named as Bitbucket now. So again, another way of maintaining your projects, again using Git. So instead of using GitHub, you can use Bitbucket. That is fine. But within that, so deployment will contain different things. One is what we call as configuration management. So configuration management is all about managing the different dependencies related to your project. Ansible, if you have worked with Ansible, Ansible is a very good tool to do that configuration management. Just letting you know. Other way of, if you don't want to use Ansible, if your projects are typically Python projects, then you can just simply depend on requirement.txt file. That is also fine. But there are certain problems which occurs specifically in real world, where your environments or your local servers doesn't support those different dependencies. Like, let's say if you're using NumPy or SciPy, they need certain other things to be installed within your system. Like you need C++ distributable system to be installed there, which cannot be installed using pip. So for that aspect, you need to do either you manually install those things or you use some configuration management tool. Again, as I said, Ansible is a very good tool to automate that aspect. So that is one aspect of it. Next aspect is in terms of deployment itself. Either you can go for simple APIs, so API using a Flask, so you can use that. If you don't do that using API, or even if you use Flask, still you will need to use certain CI/CD tool. So how to use a continuous integration, continuous development tool, CI/CD tool? Again, there are multiple options. So you can use Jenkins, you can use any other tool available. In fact, Git itself has a CI/CD pipeline. So if you are using if you are using Atlassian product, within Atlassian product itself, you will find that there is a CI/CD pipeline created for them. If you are using GitLab GitLab not only has a CI/CD pipeline directly, but it also has a Kubernetes support for the CI/CD pipeline. So if you're into the containerization world, now I'm keeping this separate for a moment. Just forget that I'm assuming that you're not using containerization. Then using maybe either Jenkins or any other tool, or using the default Git CI/CD pipeline itself, you can deploy those things. If you are using containerization, then there will be another aspect, another layer of abstraction layer, which will be coming to you. So there are certain advantages of using containerization also. So like if you are using Docker containerization, you will need to create a Docker Compose file, which you need. So now this is where you move from your normal structure to your microservice architecture. So within this microservice architecture, you need to have a pipeline where you modify each of these containers, and whenever you modify each of these containers, they should be pushed to the main container. So you need a container orchestration system. So typically data scientists individually just create a container and deploy those. This is very easy to do using command line, and to maintain those command lines you can use shell scripts also. But if you want to go into real enterprise level solutions, you should use some container orchestration system. And one such container orchestration system is Kubernetes. There is Docker Swarm, there is OpenShift, and then there are others also. Right? Now always remember, using these Kubernetes and all is it's not very simple. You need some people who knows about this stuff and who can maintain this. So like maintaining a whole Kubernetes cluster is not cannot be a part-time job of a developer. There needs to be a dedicated resource who does this activity. All right. So depending on like how your organization is structured, what kind of infrastructure is there, you should select this. If you are working within cloud environment like AWS or Azure, they themselves has their own CI/CD pipeline. So without using all of this, you can also deploy your solutions. In fact, specifically in a data science project, Azure, if you're working with Azure, Azure has a separate ML deployment pipeline completely created for you. So just by using GUI, you can see a short tutorial, you can deploy your whole ML solutions without actually having all of these tools. So depending on like how your organization is structured, what your organization prefers, you can use any of these tools. I hope it made sense. Atul?
Yes, right. Thank you, Sajjad. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, all right, guys. If you have any further questions, you can always ask me in Slack, or you can message me on LinkedIn or Gmail. That is fine with me. Whenever I have time, I'll revert back to you. Thanks everyone to join this session. I hope it was helpful for you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Sajjad. Thanks for the wonderful session. I'm sure guys loved it. Please fill the feedback from guys. I think we are good to leave the session now. Thank you, Sajjad. Thank you, guys. Have a nice Sunday. Stay safe. Guys, please don't forget to fill the feedback form. Thank you.